Dr. Andrew Gallimore is a computational neurobiologist, chemical pharmacologist, and writer living and working in Tokyo. He has a master's degree in chemical pharmacology and a PhD in biological chemistry from the University of Cambridge, and has held postdoctoral research fellowships in computational neuroscience at the universities of York, Oxford, and Okinawa. He has been fascinated by the neuropharmacology of psychedelics for more than 2 decades and is the author of 3 books: Alien Information Theory, Psychedelic Drug Technologies and the Cosmic Game. The second one, Reality Switch Technologies, Psychedelics as Tools for the Discovery and Exploration of New Worlds. And the forthcoming, Death by Astonishment, Confronting the Mystery of the World's Strangest Drug, which focuses on the history of DMT and science's continuing struggle to understand how such a simple, naturally occurring molecule can have such astonishing effects on the human mind. His current interests lie in the implications of DMT in understanding the nature of reality and how it might be developed as a tool for extended communication with non-human intelligences inaccessible to normal waking consciousness. It's my pleasure to welcome Andrew Gallimore. Welcome to the Brainforest Café, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, Dennis. Good to see you and speak to you again.
Yes, it's good to see you. So you're many time zones, if not dimensions away. You're many time zones away from me. It's about 9 or 10 in the morning there in Tokyo, right?
Yes.
For a dimension hopping guy like you, this doesn't amount to much, you know. Uh, so I've read this book. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
And it's amazing in so many different ways. I mean, it seems that DMT, which is been a sort of a continuing carrot for both of us and also for my brother for many years. I believe the title is taken from something he said when somebody asked if you could die from DMT. He said, "As far as I know, you can't unless you die from astonishment."
Right.
And hopefully that hasn't taken place in too many people. But how did you get into this, and what do you make of your discoveries? Because you have looked far enough into DMT that it's clear that it's not just another psychedelic. There's something very special about DMT. Tell me what you've learned. I mean, tell me a fraction of what you've learned. Give me the give me the thumbnail sketch. What is the takeaway? Because you've been puzzling over this for decades, and there have been symposia and books written and all sorts of things about the DMT entities that you encounter and that some encounter, the self-transforming elf machines, all these bizarre entities that one encounters. And of course, the first question becomes, are these real? But then you go down that rabbit hole because you have to say, well, what do you mean by real?
Right.
And we just go from there. So give me your perspective that you've gleaned from all of this experimentation, and not only that, but thinking about what it all means.
Yeah. I mean, I I first my first I first learned about DMT from your brother. Well, from an article, an interview that he gave in some magazine that a friend gave me when I was about 16 years old. He said, "Look at this, you might be interested." And it was an interview with Terence, and he was asked about his favorite drug, which was this molecule called DMT, which I'd never heard of.
Mhm.
I had no idea what it stood for. So I had to go to the library because this was pre-internet. Go to the library and look up this acronym, initialism DMT, and find out what it meant. It gave me the completely wrong answer. Dimethyl terephthalate, which is a type of plastic. So for a
Right.
while, I thought
Nope, that's
DMT,
not it.
that's not it. But yeah, then the internet was emerging during that period, and I spent all of my time on the sole computer that was kind of hooked up to the World Wide Web in my school. Nobody else was using it, but I spent all my spare time kind of just trying to find out about this molecule, because it sounded absurd. I don't think I really believed what I was hearing about this molecule. I thought that people were just kind of exaggerating. But of course, all of that changed when I actually got to experience it for the first time. And I was, astonished would be the word. I think the first time in my life that I've ever been truly astonished. And your brother also used to say that true astonishment is perhaps the rarest of emotions. It functions as a synonym for, very surprised or a little bit shocked, but actually true astonishment,
Right,
I
right.
think is very rare. And I was confronted with that emotion for the first time of shock, horror. I was appalled. It was undeniable to me. Something took over me, and it was obviously in that moment, it was undeniably apparent to me that this was some kind of immense, unbelievably immense alien is the only word I can use, alien intelligence. And I guess my life since that moment has been trying to understand that, try to get to grips with what that experience means and how it's possible that this
Sure.
simple plant alkaloid can effect such changes. And I think the thread that runs through my work, I would say, is not so much trying to tell people what DMT is, or what these beings, whether they're real or not, which is a knotty issue. But really, what I'm trying to do is trying to really convince people that there is something very, very difficult to explain about this. This is not, science doesn't have it all wrapped up.
Right.
Um, it's not easy to explain why, when you smoke this or inject this simple plant alkaloid, your brain suddenly becomes capable of fabricating with listen virtuosity these indescribably complex, highly coherent alien narrative structures with these incredibly strange, non-human, non-animal beings that have no referent in the normal waking world. That's not easy to explain. So I spend a lot of my time explaining why these are not just normal kind of hallucinations. This is not dream imagery. And I also give Jungian, that's become kind of de rigueur in psychedelic circles now, is just to say, oh, don't worry, this is just archetypal imagery that's bubbling up from the collective unconscious. And
Right.
mm, um,
I,
and I,
I like the way that you unpack this in your analysis of it, because there's something qualitatively qualitatively quite different in DMT than from any other psychedelic. And so you go through, your book is tremendously entertaining, I have to say, and very well written. And I really like that the first part of it, as an ethnobotanist and somebody who's been obsessed with plants and with DMT for many years. I like the way the history that you give of the discovery of DMT and how it took so long for people to even understand the importance of these admixture plants and ayahuasca. And so that's a very interesting, cultural uh perspective on DMT. It's kind of surprising that it took so long to figure out, the active ingredients in ayahuasca, was this mysterious admixture plant, whatever it was that contained DMT. So that was useful, and that's useful reading for anybody that hasn't it hasn't really looked into the history of what you might call psychedelic uh ethnopharmacology with respect to DMT. Uh but the other thing that I like about your work is you examine all the other possibilities. I mean, you have this phenomenon and you present these other possibilities, trying to basically wiggle out of the ultimate admission. It's like, well, are they dreams? And no, they're not dreams, because dreams have a certain neurophysiological characteristic and phenomenological character to them. That's not what this is. Are they archetypes? No, they're not archetypes. I mean, archetypes are, you could put them different ways, but archetypes are basically kind of a genetic reflection of our, what you might call, our paleo conscious history. They come out of ancestral roots. They may have a genetic substrate, but these things that you see on DMT, that some people see at some times, not all the time, but these places that you go that seem unique to DMT, it's like a place, and it's very hard to explain that away. I mean, it's like, as Terence often said, and as you say in your book, it's like you're in this place, you don't even feel intoxicated. It's not like you're on a drug. It's like you're actually in a different place. And how can you explain that away? I mean, you're on a drug, right? But the effects at these higher doses of DMT, and pretty much uniquely DMT, uh, are not anything like other psychedelics. Other psychedelics, you could say, like LSD, and many of the others, you could say, well, they are like dreams somewhat. They are hallucinations, and they are what DMT puts in front of you once you've gone beyond the chrysanthemum, as we say, is you clearly seem to be in a place where there are other, it's very hard to explain it away as anything other than another place. I mean, it has that impression, but then the question is, how can that possibly be, Andrew?
Well, that is the big question, because we can we can we know a lot now about how, why the world appears to us as it does. And the world that I always say, my kind of axiom has always been, the world that we experience is this model constructed by our brain. We're always living. Anil Seth, it's always a hallucination. I don't like to call it always a hallucination, but we live in this world that's constructed by our brain, that it's evolved. Our brain has evolved to construct this single model of the world as a model of the environment.
Right.
It's constantly being tested against sensory information from the environment. This is the world your brain learned to construct. It's the only world your brain learned to construct,
Right.
is this model of the environment. And when you go into the dream state, your brain is disconnected from sensory inputs, but it still has all of that stuff, all of those object models and concepts, everything it learned whilst interacting with the environment, it uses to construct the dream world, which is why the dream world tends to be largely continuous with the waking world, except it's more kind of fluid and dynamic and shifts from scene to scene, etc.
Because you don't have these checks against the reality thing. You don't get that feedback mechanism, but what you see in dreams is similar to what you see when you're awake, in the sense that it may not make as much sense. It doesn't have,
Yeah.
but you see animals, you see other people, the things that you see, not these alien self-transforming elf machines singing five-dimensional objects. No, you don't get that.
Oh, you don't get that.
and I think for a long time you struggled kind of with the idea of trying to fit it into some of these other boxes, which were clearly inappropriate because you didn't want to, I don't know, you didn't want to come off as a complete crackpot, maybe. But you finally reached a place where you have to say, no, this is qualitatively not like any other psychedelic. You know, it's unique in that sense. And it delivers this very, very peculiar experience, which, you know, it's like really being ushered into a different reality, you know, every different reality channel, call it that. But then to even say that calls into question like everything we think we know about what is reality and what and you know it really calls everything we think we know about how the mind interfaces with reality and constructs this, like I call it, the reality hallucination, you know, you know, that ordinary consciousness, but call it a brain created simulation. There's all this talk about, do we live in a simulation? Well, yes, we do. Our brains create one. That's what we inhabit, you know. Uh, but the DMT, uh, at these higher doses, at these transcendent doses, they don't really conform to that. It's something completely other, and I think other is the term that describes it. What do you think's going on here? Have you got this figured out?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure
I
I've
mean,
got it figured out, but I think what really been trying to do, as you say, is to eliminate other possibilities, and then we're left with, I think it was Sherlock Holmes who said that when you've eliminated all other options, what remains is the truth, right? Or something to that effect. And I think
right,
that's why, I'm kind of forced, my hand is kind of forced by DMT because I can't say it's dreams. I can't say it's similar to psychotic hallucinations. I can't say it's archetypal imagery. So we're left with this gaping hole in our understanding where the brain is doing something it shouldn't be able to do by all of our reckoning. The brain shouldn't know. It's
right,
like, as I say in the book, it's like the brain is speaking a language it never learned to speak, constructing these worlds that bear no relationship whatsoever to the normal waking world. That shouldn't happen, and there's no simple explanation for that to happen unless there is some sort of, I've never claimed that DMT allows you to go somewhere, as in travel, in the same way that our normal waking world is always constructed by our brain, but modulated by information from sensory information from the environment, acting as like a testing signal. I think in the same way, when you psychedelics, they change that model. They perturb the brain. They perturb your world building machinery,
right.
um, and and that's what DMT is doing. And for some reason, I think we can kind of explain what DMT is doing if we invoke some kind of alternate source of information that is modulating the brain's construction of this extremely altered, extremely strange reality model. So rather than using your normal waking world model to interface with the environment, your brain is using an entirely different model to interface with some other place or some other intelligence or some other. We don't really
Some
know what
other
it is.
something, some other
Other
dimension,
something.
some other, right. I mean, exactly. The brain is in normal reality and normal everyday experience, and even in normal psychedelic experiences, whatever that might be. Uh, there's clearly, however twisted and modified your perceptions might be, there is always sort of a understanding that, you know, this is an internal experience, that, you know, there is a normal reality out there. You can open your eyes and you can more or less see this. DMT, if you get into this hyperdimensional or extra dimensional channel, it just wipes all of that out. I mean, it's literally like putting on VR goggles or something and going into a completely different world, a world that seems impossible to experience and even understand. And the immediate impulse is to invoke aliens, extraterrestrials, and whatever. And it certainly is alien. If alien means something completely, sort of incomprehensible to our ordinary uh, scope of knowledge, of understanding, then it's definitely alien in that sense. But I like in the latter part of the book when you speculate, okay, let's grant for the sake of argument that this is another place. So where is it? Where is it coming from? And I think I was reviewing your book recently, and it was something in the book that I thought was profoundly insightful. Was you said most people think of taking psychedelics, they think of going somewhere. It's like going somewhere. DMT, you don't go into the DMT state. The DMT state breaks into your state,
Yes.
takes over your state. And
Yeah.
suddenly you switch the channel and you're in this completely different different realm, which you speculate. You bring forth many potential explanations, but finally, I don't know if you've settled on it, but you suggest that you talk about these different civilizations, uh, the Kardashev rating, type 1, type 2, type 4, etc., civilizations related to the amount of energy that civilization can control. But then you talk about the opposite of that, where instead of expanding, it goes in. You talk about postulate a civilization that is a omega minus or
Right.
close to it, that has, if I understand it, has basically that inhabits the quantum realm, that somehow is able to totally manipulate space time, on a quantum level. And can you talk about a little bit more about that? And does that seem like the most likely explanation, however unlikely on the surface it sounds?
Well, I mean, yeah, so as you said, the usual way of thinking about the progress of intelligent civilizations is this expansionist trajectory to larger and larger scales.
Right.
People talk about climbing the Kardashev scale and that we're going to take over the solar system and then, larger and larger structures. But actually, if we look at human progress, at least, whilst we do spend no small sum of money kind of slinging objects into the, you know, the
Into
to kind
outer
of
space.
celestial object into outer space, actually we spend most of our efforts directed at smaller and smaller scales. Think of the Large Hadron Collider, and we're interested, nanotechnology, and thinking more in the kind of what's often called the Anti-Kardashev scale, which is developed by John Barrow, this British cosmologist, and he said actually civilizations, they tend to go inwards. And so if you take that to the kind of the combination of that scale, you end up with civilizations that are able to manipulate the basic fundamental structure of space-time, wherever that is, whether it's quantum or sub-quantum, we don't really know. And if a being is going to transcend in some way, it's unlikely that they're going to be kind of shedding their bodies and setting off for the stars, but actually it's more likely that they're going to be instantiating themselves in the fundamental computational substrate of, the ground of reality, and they would effectively disappear for all intents and purposes. And they would become, everywhere and nowhere, They would become effectively godlike beings. And none of this transcends, or none of this kind of strays too far from modern scientific discourse on the matter. So what I'm saying here isn't crazy stuff. This is the stuff that quite serious button-down cosmologists and astrobiologists have been talking about for decades now. And so I'm not trying to say that I definitely think that DMT is allowing you access or allowing you to interface with these intelligences, but to say such a thing isn't crazy. To say that perhaps this universe is teeming with intelligences far, far beyond anything that we can imagine isn't a non-scientific thing to say. And if they wanted to communicate with us, they wanted to kind of show themselves for whatever reason, the most obvious route that they would take would be to directly interface with our brains. That would be the obvious thing to do. They would cut out the middleman. They wouldn't need to materialize in some kind of physical form so that we could see them, or they might well do that. But in fact, they would simply interface directly with our neural machinery, manipulate our world-building machinery. And they would likely appear to be extremely powerful and extremely incomprehensibly intelligent beings. And this just happens to be the type of beings that you meet when you smoke DMT, is these incomprehensibly powerful and intelligent beings that seem far older and far more advanced than us. So that's all I'm saying, really, is that actually it's not crazy. It's not woo. It's not kind of leaving my rationality behind and heading off into kind of the spiritual or mystical realms. But actually, I'm remaining perfectly scientific in saying that maybe there are intelligences that are extremely multitudinous and that are far more advanced than us and that exist everywhere and nowhere, embedded in the basic structure, basic foundational structure of reality. And if they wanted to communicate with us, then maybe DMT would be the conduit by which they are able to do that.
And this to me makes more sense than to postulate that it has some extraterrestrial origin, because of the separations and the distances and everything. I mean, it's interesting that we expend so much, our orientation towards space is so much toward out there. You know, we send out these probes, you know, we send out manned expeditions that are, you know, pretty modest affairs. I mean, going to the moon, you know, it took tremendous effort to get to the moon. Now we haven't gone back for over 50 years because it's damn hard, you know, to get humans out into space. And they are not physiologically able to adapt to it anyway. So we have this orientation. Then you've got toward externals and this preoccupation with the cosmos. We're never I used to be like Terence. It was like our destiny is in the stars. I don't think so. I don't think we're ever going to the stars, you know, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but the dimension that we maybe want to explore is this inner dimension, this much, much smaller dimension. And if the nature of these civilizations is that they're everywhere all at once, then the normal structures of space-time and distance and so on don't even apply. It's really true what the alchemist said, what is here is everywhere, what is not here is nowhere. And so if we really want to connect with these entities, they exist at some sort of sub-quantum realm or something like that, but something that is definitely accessible and that may even manipulate, you know, there's lots of speculations about the importance of quantum phenomena in consciousness, and maybe these entities working at that level are able to tap into that and just basically okay, you were watching that channel, now watch this channel, and it completely takes over what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's it. I mean, what's interesting about the neuroimaging data that's coming. In fact, there was a paper just published, unfortunately, a little bit too late for my book, but which describe. If you look back to the papers going back more than a decade now with the Imperial College Research Group, then led by Robin Carhart-Harris, they started to notice that under the influence of psychedelics, there's this loosening up. It's kind of like if you heat up a piece of glass and it becomes more malleable and kind of soft, and you can manipulate it into any kind of shape that you want. In my mind, that's precisely the kind of neural state that you want, or that these intelligences would want if they want to manipulate your world-building machinery, manipulate your cortex to effectively allow them to communicate with you, or allow them to take control and show you something.
Mhm.
And a paper came out literally just a couple of weeks ago, again from the Imperial College team, this time led by Chris Timmerman, which showed that under the influence of DMT, the brain becomes much more sensitive to external perturbations. So you input information into the brain in a DMT state, and you get a much stronger reaction, as if the brain is it's primed. I think what DMT is doing, it's not it's not taking you anywhere as such. It's inducing the brain into this highly primed, highly sensitive, highly fluid state, which is just perfect. It's perfect for one of these intelligences to kind of access, whether it could be at this subquantum level where it's accessing the brain kind of from below rather than the normal kind of
Right.
sensory conduits, and taking control, which is why I call the DMT world a directed world. It's not a sensed world in the normal sense. There's just information coming in, but the information is actually being directed, and that's why they have complete control. And there's that feeling, as you're well aware, Dennis, that when you smoke DMT, it's not like you're just going somewhere. It's like something is
Something
taking
to you,
control.
something is overwhelming you. Yeah. Yeah.
Overwhelming, and this flood of the download of data, and the fact that a phenomenon that kind of is now quite common, and that you read a lot on Reddit forums and stuff, people complaining that their DMT doesn't work anymore, and that they're suddenly, they're smoking it regularly, and it's 100% efficacy every time, and then suddenly they get a wagging finger, or a big red flashing X will appear and say not today, and they will kind of cut off access. Which is
I mean, what do you make of that? That's just crazy. Huh?
right, because that shouldn't happen,
Well,
because as
no,
you
it
are
shouldn't,
aware.
but then none of it should be happening. But
No.
I mean, so it's like the director of the show has just said, this needs to be blocked for you for a while. You've been hitting
Right,
the pipe a little bit too hard, and
hitting the pipe a little bit too
you
hard.
you need to ease
Uh-huh.
off, and so that's imposed on you. That's really strange. I mean, it's
Exactly, because people will say, "Oh, it's tolerance," but we both know that tolerance, it builds gradually. It's not an off switch. So you can't have 20 or 30 perfectly efficacious full breakthrough trips, and then suddenly an entity says, "No, no, no, not anymore," and gives you that message, "We're not letting
right,
you in."
right.
And then you try it again the next day and it still doesn't work. And sometimes people go for several months, and they're still not allowed any access. That's not easy to explain.
That is not easy to explain, and it's also further evidence in a sense that, we're not running this show at all. Our brain is not running this show. The show is being presented to us,
Exactly.
and we are perceiving it like it or not. I have to ask you, it's a bit of a tangent, but was wondering, I want to ask you, because I probably won't get the chance again, but What do you think about this guy Danny Goler's work with the lasers, and where does this fit in? And is he onto something, or is he just nuts? Or do you want
Well,
to? I
so
just
the problem I have is that so for those that don't know, his claim is that you shine a red laser on a surface,
right,
you stare into the laser, you smoke a little bit of DMT, not too much, and you stare at the laser and you can see what looks like code running. And lots of people see this, and it seems to occupy the space behind through into the wall. And he is convinced, like 100%, that this is he's seeing the matrix, he's seeing the fundamental reality code. Now, as you would expect, I don't simply take those such ideas at face value, and I think you need to think carefully about this. People have been seeing code under the influence of DMT for a long time, but this offers perhaps a highly replicable way of seeing this kind of imagery, which is great. You know, you can kind of isolate one particular slice or fragment of the broader DMT visual phenomenology using this technique. But I think it's a huge leap to go from that to you're seeing code. And the reason is that, well, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, the code is said to look like Japanese katakana,
right,
which, as many people will know, is precisely what they used in the Matrix movie, which
right,
seems a bit of an inconvenient coincidence.
yes,
But also, you know, we know that lasers, particularly red lasers, which is what he prescribes for this experiment, has a very prominent speckle type effect. So as the laser comes back off the wall, it interferes with itself and creates a pattern on the retina, which, in my opinion, acts as kind of like this sensory scaffold, highly replicable sensory scaffold around which the imagery emerges. And so people seeing code like, you know, highly regular patterns of highly complex structures wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that's what DMT does. It tends to generate highly complex imagery. So when you have this pattern on the retina, my working hypothesis, which you know, I'm welcome people to dispute, is that this sensory scaffolding effect leads to the emergence of these types of digital or code-like imagery.
and have you tried to replicate this?
No, I mean, it's not something, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity. I mean, I'm in Tokyo, but um, I know obviously I'm connected with people like, you know, Dave Luke has done it, Anton has done it, and
Mm.
several others are kind of insiders, so to speak, that we
And
both know
what do they
have
make
done.
of it? Do they get this experience?
No,
They don't. Yeah.
no, but many do seem to. I mean, Danny claims that there's, you know, 1,000 people who have seen this code, but whether they're seeing exactly the same thing, or a variant on the same thing, I've seen no evidence that they're seeing exactly the same code, but they seem to be seeing some sort of code. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon, but I always reel and kind of repelled a little bit by someone telling me this is an interesting phenomenon, but this is exactly what it is. You're seeing an actual reality code running through reality, and I
Well,
know this to be true, and I just need to prove
that's
it. That's not
that's a
my
bit of a stretch. I mean, that's a huge conclusion to leap to when you know,
yeah.
based on this. But I mean, it's interesting. I don't think it proves that we're living in a simulation. I mean, I'm not sure how he makes that leap. Uh, do you think that this code originates from this place that you go to, this sub-quantum all and everywhere world, or this is something different? This is a different thing.
Well, you know, if we are interfacing with my reaction to this would have been, and I've told this to Danny well, several times, is that if we are interfacing with some kind of intelligence, then this would be an aspect of that interaction. This would be an aspect of that directed world. So maybe they are trying to say something. Maybe this is a means by which they are communicating, which would be very, very interesting and certainly worth studying. But Danny has very specific, concrete beliefs about what it is. I mean, he thinks it's literally an object in the environment that he's seeing, that the red light is reflecting off this code. Why, if reality was simulated, we'd be able to see the code running through it. That doesn't make any sense to me. The code runs elsewhere, and the world would be its output. You don't see code by zooming in on the computer screen when you're playing a video game. The code is somewhere else, so to speak.
behind
So
the
the idea that it's running through reality in this way, in this matrix way, doesn't make any sense. So I can't make his model make
right,
sense in my mind.
right.
But it could be, it could be that this is one aspect of this show, this directed world that the laser's allowing us to kind of focus in on one aspect of that, which is in itself very interesting. I just wish that he'd kind of let go or loosen his grip a little bit on this firm belief that this is the fundamental code of reality that he's seeing
Well, I
directly.
think it's gone over from, scientific inquiry and to basically, it's now become a belief system for
Yeah.
him. And so, its value is diminished because, there's no real way to test this or to look at alternative explanations. But I don't want to spend too much time more time talking about that. I was just interested in terms of the worlds that open up in this DMT place, that whatever their origin is, these entities are very much interested in transmitting information, right? They seem to have things that they want you to learn. But it's very hard to bring anything back, and it's hard to know what exactly you're supposed to learn. I mean, I'm wondering, you know, what do you think? I mean, what is the message? When you can spend with these new extended state technologies with XDMT extended states, you can spend more time in that place. And some people, in these studies have done so. Do you know how much the duration has been pushed using these protocols? I mean, what's the current record for being in the DMT extended state? Does anybody know?
Yeah. So the original, as you're aware, so myself and Rick Strassman, we originally proposed this model for extended state DMT, DMTX. It came to be known as, or
Right.
it's come to be known, um, um, with understanding that DMT doesn't exhibit this subjective tolerance, or very minimal subjective tolerance, and it has all of these pharmacological peculiarities that mean that it's perfectly set up to be used in this way, to this constant infusion, which allows you to maintain this stable level of DMT in the brain and induce somebody into the DMT state for as long as you like, really. Because, as you said, there is, going back to Timothy Leary's first experiments in the early 1960s with DMT, and he describes seeing these beings with these jewel encrusted pads, which in my mind look like exotic iPads, that trying to show him something. And
Uh-huh.
Anton Bilson, also, I did an interview with him for the book, and he was describing, basically, he'd never heard Timothy Leary's experience, but he was describing the same experience. He was describing this being showing him this jewel encrusted pad, that he couldn't make sense of. Like, look at this, use this will tell you something. And also Spiros, who was DMT 40 in Rick Strassman's study in the 90s, during one of his experiences, instead of kind of breaking through or entering this alternate reality space, his entire field of vision was blocked by this machine with dials and things. This highly advanced. He in his mind, this thing was a reality synthesizer, which I can't imagine how he knew that, but in his head, he knew it was a reality synthesizer, and they were kind of pushing it. He couldn't look past it. They were pushing it in his face, as if to say, "Come on, idiot, just use this." And you get the feeling that perhaps despite the immensity of their intelligence, it's very difficult for them to quite understand how stupid we are. You know? You
Uh,
get that
I
sense
I en
some.
I encountered the reality synthesizer
Oh,
once
really?
when I did Pharmawaska, interestingly enough. I did
Ah,
Pharmawaska, and it was so I mean, it was so strange. It was like it was very much like going to a movie. I mean, it was like I was on a balcony. I felt like I was on a balcony, and down below me, I could see this three-dimensional object that was twisting and transforming in all sorts of hyperdimensional ways, and I could just look at it. And when I first did it, when I first did this, took the ayahuasca, not much happened. There was sort of a bit of visuals, and then it was, kind of typical pre-threshold DMT type stuff, and then it sort of faded away. And then I thought, well, is that all there is to it? And so then I got out of my tent where I was camped, I smoked my pipe for a few minutes, and then I realized, wait a minute, that was the those were the that was the opening scene, that was the screensaver. Now the real show begins. And it
yeah.
was very much like watching this thing, and I could watch this self-transforming object seemingly below me, for about an hour, just going through its transformations. And of course, you're just completely baffled. And then it's like, show's over, curtain closes, get in the elevator, walk out of the theater. I mean, it was very much that. And voice coming behind my left shoulder was saying, "This is the reality synthesizer." So
Ah, but you got a literal message to that
th-
effect. This is a
this is the
reality.
reality synthesizer. That was what. The other thing that's baffling to me in some ways, you can spend a lot of time now that we have the extended state technology, one could stay in that place for hours, maybe days, maybe weeks. Would we want to? Probably not. I mean, it could turn out to be like trapped on an airplane watching a really cheesy cartoon for, with no option to turn it off. I mean, I guess the question is, it seems to get to a certain level, and you're presented with all of this incomprehensible, extremely beautiful, fascinating, but impossible, and it's like, what's the take home? Where do you reach the point where you say, "Oh, I get it. Now this is what they're trying to convey."
Yeah. You know, I, so in answer to your first question, 90 minutes is the current record, I think, by Matthias Liechti in Basel, I think, of all places. So I've often wondered this is like, why can't they be more clear? But perhaps this is a message that is incomprehensible. Maybe they're kind of leading us on and showing us that, hey, there is something here that you little apes simply cannot comprehend. How are we going to convince you of that fact? And most people are convinced of that fact, that there is something there. There is some kind of intelligence there that's real, that is extant, that is external to us, that is more advanced than us, that exists from its own side. I think that in itself is a message, even if you don't get, it's something that we can understand as such, a coherent set of sentences that we can write down. The message in itself is, hey, we're here, and we're real, and you're not the big dogs in town. That actually there are beings and intelligences that are far beyond you. How do we want to respond to that? How do we want to progress? Is this our future? Are they showing us a vision of the progression of an intelligent civilization, not to the stars, but towards this deeper level of omniscience or of omnipotence, or at least super or hyper intelligence that these beings already seem to have reached. And I think in terms of the DMTX, one thing that I always hoped was that by extending it and stabilizing the level of DMT in the brain, which you can do to an extent with ayahuasca, and we should always appreciate the incredible sophistication of that technology, which it is, the greatest pharmacognostical discovery in the archaic world, I think, is what Jonathan Ott described it as. But still, you're at the mercy of pharmacokinetics. It rises and then it stabilizes, plateaus, and then it comes down.
Right.
With DMT, you're up there and then it remains fairly stable.
Right.
And what the early studies at Imperial and now in Matthias Selichty's group show is that the experience itself tends to stabilize as well. It's like the brain is kind of settling into constructing or being induced to construct this alternate reality space, this alternate interface, and then you get to spend more time in a more stabilized state. A normal DMT experience is like, you're there, you're kind of wide-eyed, shocked, horrified, disorientated, and bewildered and baffled, and breathless and awestruck and all of these things. And then you're kind of dragged back, and by inducing you and stabilizing the DMT in your brain, you're also stabilizing that experience, and allowing you to spend time. So instead of spending a few baffled minutes looking at this contraption, you can spend, imagine sending a mathematician, an algebraic topologist or a linguist or, specialists into the realm who are experienced with the DMT state, but also have their own specific speciality.
And
Them be-
possibly that's part of the solution, or part of, I mean, what keeps bothering me is you go into this incomprehensible place, you see all these incomprehensible things, and then what? I mean, perhaps if you introduce topologists to it, or linguists, or people with a certain set of skills and an understanding, it would make more sense. I mean, we're sort of, at least I am not any of those things, so I can experience it and I can say, "Oh, wow, gee whiz, this is amazing," but I can't really bring much more out of it than that. Perhaps a mathematician, somebody like that could have this experience and say, "Well, of course, this is the, eigenfunction in visual real space," or something like that. I mean, I guess what I'm reaching out for in some ways, what I'm wondering is, there's this parallel universe with, and I think we can kind of get past the idea that this is something created by the brain. It's something that we experience because we experience everything through the brain. But this is a show that is, we're not orchestrating it. It's out there. It's a parallel realm of existence, which we are privileged to peek into, using DMT. But then So then I have the experience, and then I come down and I have to, so what do I do with this the next day? I have to go to work. I've got things going on. You've got the, regular uh, trivia of day-to-day life. I mean, is it going to influence our culture, our evolution? Is it just a distraction? Well, just a distraction. I mean, I guess part of its value is you're forced to admit that there's a parallel realm of super intelligent entities that we can interface with under some circumstances, but we can't do it all the time. And what do we do with the lessons that we've learned other than be humble?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of ask me, if these beings really are super intelligent, why haven't they given us, you know, mapped, or why haven't they given us blueprints to construct, these kind of, complex machines or this kind of thing? And I can't help but feel, that doesn't seem to be their purpose. There's never been any indication, um, to me at least, that they're trying to, that the message is so obvious, in that way, and that they're trying to make us more technologically sophisticated, or what we would expect, the kind of the sci-fi idea of learning, getting, blueprints and other technology from these beings. It doesn't seem to be that kind of thing. Often it it is literally a show. Often there's a very much a jovial, it's like, "Look at this. Look how incredible this is. Look what we can do. You can do it too." But none of it's always, when they say you can do it too, it's always some weird kind of, singing some nine-dimensional object, or something completely so far beyond anything we could do here in this reality that it seems completely applicable. It's not like transferable knowledge, so to speak,
Right, it's not.
which suggests that's not their aim.
Yeah, that's not their aim, and the idea that they might give us the blueprint for the time machine or all of this technology
Right.
innovation, that's really an expectation that we put on it. We don't know if it fits into their agenda. We don't even know if they have an agenda, and
No.
they just are what they are. And, but it's frustrating in some ways to not really, uh and if you'd think that if you could spend more time in this extended state, that the story would begin to unfold somehow, but it doesn't seem to. It just seems to be the same each time, even though it's astonishing. It's like, what am I trying to say? There's no plot. You know,
Right.
it's just a state of being, and you experience it, and you come back and you're astonished and baffled and not particularly wiser or anything else, that
Well, I mean, if you look back at, I mean, one thing I do in the book is I place great emphasis on the indigenous kind of traditional use of it, and it's clear that these kind of shamanistic cultures going back a long time, these beings, they are described as members of their own tribe, and they interact with them, as they interact with members of, other humans. To them, it's just living their life, and instead
right,
of being
right,
visible, they also have this menagerie of other beings that populate, and they sometimes communicate with them. That, to them, it's perfectly normal and natural for them to spend their lives in these relationships which alter as they mature, and this kind of thing. These hekura and other kind of being, the shapiri, I also describe in the book, these multitudinous little people, as they're often described, funnily
right,
enough.
right.
A whereas us, as Westerners, we've really just dipped our toes into the water. I mean, DMT was discovered by Stephen Zara, in its pure form at least, in 1956. So
Right.
we've had half a century, and it's only just now, in the last few decades, largely thanks to yourself and your brother, that people are starting to actually take this seriously. But we're still far from that point where large numbers of people are making great efforts to try to understand this molecule. Most are just happy to say it's hallucination. The guy on Twitter, a neuroscientist, who said that entity encounters are illusory social events, which to me was just the most absurd way of describing an entity encounter in DMT. He clearly never taken DMT.
Well, it's one of these things that it's easy to dismiss, I mean, it's to say it's a hallucination or it's like a dream. This is the explanation that is not an explanation, because it
Right.
doesn't really fit the data. Do you think that when indigenous people take DMT in this state, do they encounter this hyper technological machine-like science fiction-ish realm, or is it different for them?
That is a very good question. I mean, I think you probably know more about that than I would. I mean, you probably spent much more time with Indigenous peoples who've used these kind of preparations. I mean, there are certain commonalities. They obviously they use entirely different words and different language in the way that they interpret their experiences. They're not going to talk about computers, for example,
Right,
if they've never had access to, even if they were to see one as such. But certainly the types of beings that they describe, these multitudinous singing, dancing beings that they call the Hekura, well, they sound very much to me like machine elves.
like what
Um,
the machine elves, right, right.
right. And, Mark Plotkin, who was one of Richard Schulte's proteges, he took a pena, or a pena, um, the snuff.
Mhm,
Um, the first, it was the kind of the two-man procedure where it was blown into his nasal passages.
right,
This was the first time he'd ever done it. And suddenly, in his visual field, were all of these tiny little dancing beings, kind of bounding around. And he asked the shaman, what are these? And he said, oh, those are the Hekuda. These are the spirits of the forest. So he was having what in modern parlance would have been described as, a machine elf or elf-like experience. And to them, the indigenous peoples, he was having a Hekuda experience, but it seems to
right.
be the same type
Oh,
of
so it
being.
is similar, it is similar,
Yeah.
and it's but not so much emphasis on the machine or the technological part. It also seems that for these people, this is much more a daily reality. I mean, they don't
Yeah.
necessarily take Ibina daily, but the Hikora are a constant sort of element of their worldview, of their experience, not necessarily being seen all the time, certainly being felt. I mean, they internalize these beings, they enter
Right.
into these, and that's the basis of their shamanic power. How many of these entities you have dwelling inside you, wherever that is in your chest or in your head or whatever. So I always have said, and I think it's still true. I think that indigenous people, they've been at this for a long time, so we would do well to listen to them, and we do, to the degree that we can, but they're models for what. Well, they don't really think the way we do, and we think in a scientific way. We're trying to construct a model for what this is. They probably don't bother with that. It's just
Um,
of experience, and
it's just it's for them it's perfectly normal and natural that they would interact with these beings. However, there is in I was reading Peter Gow, so he's a Scottish anthropologist. I describe it later in the book, but he was um, he spent a long time with the Piro people in, I don't know whether it's Brazil or Venezuela, but anyway, somewhere down there in South America. And they use ayahuasca to interact with these beings, which they call kaiglu, which literally translates as those who cause visions to be seen. So they had the insight, as I see it, these Piro shamans, that they're not seeing the beings in their true form, but the beings are causing their visions to be seen, which is precisely what the kind of conclusion that I came to through a completely different route, the kind of the neuroscientific route, the idea that these beings are interfacing and directing the imagery using our world building machinery. These guys have known it. You know, these Piro shamans in Amazonia have known this a long time, that these, you're not seeing actual, you know, panthers or anacondas. These discarnate entities don't really have the form of earthly creatures, but they take on that form, or they appear to us in that form, or we're shown these forms because these are the things that we can understand. That makes sense. So I think there is a lot of really profound insight there. But of course, it's couched in entirely different language because it comes from an entirely different worldview to what kind of the Western worldview. But often they reach the same conclusions just through the experience, through their interactions with these beings. They come to realize that the beings are the ones showing them things. So I think that's really cool that there's this meeting of these different ideas from entirely different worldviews and entirely different perspectives.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I want to also ask you one thing. I think it's interesting to compare DMT, which has the property of psychedelics and this unique property in itself, and then 5-methoxy DMT, which is a
Mm.
sort of another character. But in 5-methoxy DMT, you don't get these effects. You don't even get visual effects.
Yeah.
And I've never heard reports of anyone, maybe people haven't looked into it, but 5-methoxy DMT doesn't access this place, apparently. It seems to access a place of more or less void or the clear light or something like that. As a neurophysiologist and as a chemist, what do you think is going on there? You have any insights as to why 5-MeO and DMT are so different?
Well, I mean, it is remarkable that they are so different. I mean, the fact that you're talking about an extra methoxy group or not makes a world of very much, literally a world of difference.
Y
Um, what the subject zero with the DMTX studies in Imperial College, Professor Carl Smith, who you would have met, I think you would have met him at Tyringham, I
Mhm.
think a couple of
I
times.
did.
Yeah. So he described. I remember quite a few years ago now. He said to me, "DMT is like the fifth dimension, and 5-MeO DMT is like the 12th dimension. You go through. I think what 5-MeO does is it pushes you past form. DMT is all about form and content and structure. That's what characterizes it. I mean, in a very obvious and quite dramatic way. It's all about the structure and the form that you're seeing, whereas 5-MeO pushes you past that into the formless, and you seem to be accessing a state of pure conscious awareness where there is no form. Form is of no relevance and no consequence. And I think it's kind of leading us to that realization that it's all illusion. I mean, this is a message as old as humanity, that whether it's this normal waking world we're looking at, or whether we're looking at this incredible DMT world, it's all part of the same kind of illusion. It's all form. It's none of it's really real. It ultimately it's all pure consciousness taking on all these forms, and 5-MeO pushes you past
Just cut
into.
through all that, brings you to the ultimate formless state. My
Exactly.
first
Yeah.
reaction is, "How boring." You know? There's, like, no content, you know? I mean, what it's like, I mean, at least DMT in this state presents content. You can watch it. The cartoon runs. I mean, 5-MeO. I mean, I can't imagine doing an extended state experiment with 5-MeO. Can you?
They are thinking about it.
You have
They
been
are thinking.
thinking about it? Uh,
I haven't, but I know that Imperial College certainly are thinking about it, and Carl wants to do it. What Carl, interestingly, during one of the extended state DMT trips that he had for 30 minutes, at one point, when he was deep in the DMT state, he says at the end of the bed, he saw like a fissure in the DMT space, and he could see the 5-MeO DMT space there, as if he wasn't, as if he was being held within this kind of middle space, the DMT space, and that actually he could have pushed through, perhaps, into the 5-MeO, suggesting there is some deeper relationship between the DMT space, which is all form and content, and the 5-MeO DMT space. But I'm like you, Dennis. I'm DMT. I can get my teeth into it. I can't get my teeth into formless, pure consciousness void. So I think that's why it's less interesting for me from a scientific perspective.
right.
It's because it's harder for me to kind of get my teeth into it. But DMT is the king in that respect, I think.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. There's much left to be learned, I guess. I mean, that's the take-home lesson, and, the fact that this DMT realm is out there, and it's so unlike anything that is a normal part of human experience, whatever that is. I mean, it's a good reason for humility, if nothing else, you know? It's one of those things where we tend to think that we know a lot about the way reality is structured, and, scientists can be a bit arrogant and kind of think we have this whole thing figured out. Then DMT comes along or something like that, and then and the answer, and then it says, "No, you just think you know, you just